Steffi Graf, the greatest German tennis player of all time, a woman whose legacy is woven into the very fabric of the sport, stood completely motionless. And somehow, that silence said everything. Because this was more than a memorable crowd reaction, more than a viral moment, more than a teenager speaking German in the middle of a tennis match. It was a moment that quietly redefined belonging. The kind of moment television highlights will never fully capture. The kind that makes even legends stop, stare, and realize they are witnessing something larger than sport itself. Stay with this story until the very end, because what Alex Eala did that day in Berlin reached far beyond language. It touched the very heart of what tennis has spent generations avoiding. Because there is another version of this story, a version where none of this ever happens. In that version, Alexandra Eala grows up in the Philippines, plays at a local club, shows flashes of brilliance, maybe even extraordinary talent, and then slowly disappears into the background of a system that was never truly designed to see her. A world where funding flows elsewhere, where opportunity speaks with an accent, where scouts search familiar countries, familiar academies, familiar names. A world where talent alone is rarely enough. And that is what made the scene in Berlin feel almost unreal. A young Filipina standing at the center of one of Europe's grandest tennis stages, speaking flawless German with effortless confidence, while an entire stadium watched in stunned silence. Not trying to fit in. Belonging. In the version of the story tennis expected, the obstacles would have been too heavy. Funding would go elsewhere. Visas would become barriers instead of paperwork. Scouts would overlook Southeast Asian girls because the system had trained itself to search for greatness in more familiar places. That is the version the tennis establishment understood. This is not that version. Alex Eala was born in Manila in 2005 into a family that recognized something extraordinary long before the rest of the world did. Her father, Michael Eala, a former tennis player himself, watched the way his daughter moved across a court and immediately understood that this was not ordinary talent. This was the kind of talent that demanded sacrifice, the kind that required impossible decisions, financial risk, and a level of faith most families could never sustain across continents. So they made the decision that changed her life forever. They sent her to Spain. More specifically, to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, one of the most demanding and prestigious tennis development systems in the world. A place where talent alone is never enough. Where 12-hour training days are treated as routine. Where homesickness is considered part of the process. Where only the truly exceptional survive long enough to evolve. Eala did more than survive there. She flourished. In 2022, she captured the junior title at the Australian Open. Later that same year, she won the junior championship at the US Open, becoming the first Filipino player ever to win a Grand Slam title at any level. And she accomplished it quietly, without the machinery that usually manufactures global tennis stars, without massive sponsorship campaigns, without the institutional spotlight that follows players from traditional powerhouses. But there is a deeper part of the story that rarely gets discussed, the detail that makes that moment in Berlin feel less shocking and more inevitable in hindsight. Because during those formative years in Manacor, Eala was absorbing far more than tennis. Surrounded by Spanish coaches, European training partners, and a culture that moved effortlessly between languages, she learned how to exist inside multiple worlds at once. She traveled constantly through Europe during her junior development years. She spent time in German-speaking environments where the language was not a performance or a novelty. It was simply part of everyday life. So while the tennis world focused on her forehand, her movement, and her junior Grand Slam titles, something else was quietly taking shape beneath the surface. A young woman was learning how to walk into unfamiliar spaces anywhere in the world and belong there completely. By the time Alex Eala arrived in Berlin for the tournament that would produce one of the most unforgettable non-tennis moments in recent women's tennis history, she was no longer an outsider looking for validation. She was not a novelty, not a feel-good underdog, not the surprising young player European crowds politely applaud before expecting an early exit. She was already a professional, a ranked competitor, A player who had proven on the Grand Slam stage that she belonged in every serious conversation about the future of women's tennis. Berlin simply hadn't realized it yet. And then came the changeover. Stay with this moment, because what unfolded over the next 30 seconds is what stopped even Steffi Graf in her tracks. To understand why the reaction was so explosive, you first have to understand what a changeover in professional tennis is supposed to be. Forgettable. 90 seconds of routine mechanics. Players sit down, wipe away sweat, drink water, reset mentally. Ball kids move silently in the background, trained almost to disappear. The crowd relaxes, shifts in their seats, glances at phones, murmurs softly while waiting for play to resume. Nothing memorable is supposed to happen during a changeover. That is the entire design of it. And instead of offering the usual nod or polite half-smile players give ball kids during changeovers, Alexandra Eala spoke. In German. Not rehearsed phrases delivered with tourist confidence. Not stiff textbook vocabulary carefully memorized for effect. Real German. Warm, relaxed, conversational, the kind of fluency that only comes from genuine immersion. People sitting courtside caught fragments of the exchange. The young ball kid's expression changed instantly. Surprise gave way to pure joy, a grin spreading so wide it became visible even from the upper sections of the stadium. And then the realization began to spread. The front rows understood first, then the middle sections, then the entire arena. The applause did not slowly build. It detonated. A sudden wave of emotion crashing through the stadium with a force that had nothing to do with a winner being hit or a match point being saved. It was the sound of thousands of people falling in love with someone all at once. Eala herself seemed startled by the reaction. She looked around the stadium with an expression balanced perfectly between embarrassment and amusement, as though she genuinely hadn't expected the moment to matter. As though speaking German to a German teenager in Germany required no explanation at all. And that authenticity is exactly what shattered the crowd emotionally. Because the audience understood something instinctively before they could even put it into words. This was not performance. This was not media training. Not calculated charm. Not an athlete manufacturing likability for cameras and social clips. This was a young woman from the Philippines, shaped by years in Spain, competing in Germany, who had quietly taken the time to learn the language of the people around her. Not because it improved her ranking. Not because sponsors demanded it. Not because anyone told her to, but because she genuinely wanted to connect. And somewhere in the dignitary section, among former champions and tournament officials, one figure absorbed the scene with an expression the cameras captured in astonishing detail. Steffi Graf did not move. Completely still. Completely frozen. And what sat behind that expression is what makes this story truly unforgettable. But before understanding Graf's reaction, it's important to understand the scale of what erupted around her in those seconds. Berlin crowds are not passive audiences. German tennis culture carries decades of emotional history, shaped by Graf herself, by Boris Becker, by generations of champions who came to symbolize discipline, resilience, and national pride. And when German crowds are genuinely moved, the atmosphere transforms completely. A tennis stadium stops feeling like a sporting venue. It becomes something closer to a concert, a cathedral, a collective emotional release that everyone experiences differently but nobody ever forgets. That is what Eala triggered in 30 seconds. Phones appeared across the stadium almost simultaneously, not to check messages, but to record history unfolding in real time. Strangers tapped each other's shoulders. Realization spread outward, and within 4 minutes of the changeover ending, the clip had already escaped the stadium. Not through official tournament broadcasts, those were still focused on the match, but through the unofficial digital bloodstream of modern sports culture. Fan accounts, courtside recordings, group chats, reaction pages, the sprawling online ecosystem designed to capture the moments television almost always misses. The footage spread with astonishing speed. Hashtags connected to IGA, Swiatek, and German-language reactions began trending within the hour. Filipino tennis communities, already among the most passionate and globally connected fan bases in women's tennis, amplified the clip across platforms almost instantly. and the numbers climbed with a peculiar velocity reserved for moments that require no explanation. The kind of moment people understand emotionally before they even process it intellectually. Comments flooded in across multiple languages. German fans wrote about how unexpectedly moving the interaction felt. Filipino supporters described the pride of watching someone from their country navigate international spaces with such natural confidence and grace. Even longtime tennis traditionalists, the kind who usually resist distractions from the sport itself, found themselves sharing the clip anyway. One comment appeared again and again in different forms. She didn't have to do that. And that was exactly why it mattered. Because the most powerful gestures are almost always the unnecessary ones. The moments that cost nothing strategically but reveal everything emotionally. Alexandra Eala could have remained silent during that changeover. She could have nodded politely, focused on the match, and treated the interaction the way professional athletes are trained to treat most interactions during competition, briefly, functionally, forgettably. Instead, she looked at a teenager doing an invisible job and chose to meet that person with warmth, attention, and language that made them feel seen. Not for cameras, not for headlines, not for applause, just because it felt natural to her. And Berlin responded because the crowd recognized something increasingly rare in professional sports, a moment with no performance inside it. No branding, no calculation, no manufactured emotion. Just genuine human connection unfolding unexpectedly in the middle of elite competition. And throughout all of it, Steffi Graf remained perfectly still. That stillness mattered. Because Graf understood better than almost anyone what professional tennis usually demands from its stars. Control, distance, precision, emotional discipline. For 15 years, she lived at the summit of a sport that rewards composure almost as much as brilliance. And perhaps that is why her reaction carried such weight. Because what she witnessed in those seconds was not dominance. It was humanity. Eala did not walk into Berlin intending to create a defining cultural moment. She did not arrive with a strategy to charm the crowd, impress former champions, or generate a viral clip that would circle the tennis world before the match had even ended. She simply acknowledged another human being in the language that made that person feel at home. And 50,000 people understood, almost simultaneously, that they had witnessed something the sport rarely knows how to create on purpose. A completely genuine moment of connection that transcended rankings, nationality, and the machinery of professional competition. Graf's silence became its own form of tribute. The crowd's eruption became the verdict. And Eala's small, slightly surprised smile afterward became the final detail everyone remembered, the expression of someone who had changed an entire stadium without ever trying to. The real question left behind by this moment isn't whether Iga Swiatek will win more Grand Slams, reach world number 1, or build a resume worthy of tennis immortality. The deeper question is this: what happens when a sport that has always rewarded excellence encounters an athlete who refuses to separate greatness from humanity? Because that was the power of Berlin. Not a trophy, not a ranking point, not a championship speech. Just one brief moment of genuine connection that reminded thousands of people why sports matter in the first place. If this story stayed with you, if you believe women's tennis deserves more storytelling that goes beyond scorelines and statistics, then stay with us. Every week, we explore the moments the highlights overlook, the emotions broadcasts rush past, the human stories hidden behind elite competition, and the quiet interactions that reveal who these athletes really are.
Subscribe now.